президент Владимир Putin.
During a speech in 2014, Vladimir Putin used a term that showed both a strong connection to history and not so subtly pointed to his plans for the future.
Терминология еще царских времен – это Новороссия. И вот этот вот Харьков, Луганск, Донецк, Херсон, Николаев, Одесса не входили в состав Украины в царские времена.
Novorossiya, or New Russia, is an 18th century term describing the area of the Russian Empire surrounding the Black Sea. However, since 1991 and the fall of the USSR, it encompasses the 6 southern states of Ukraine. Putin used it during an official presidential statement to separatist forces who'd seized the eastern regions of the country, referring to them as the militia of Novorossiya. It was very deliberate language, a statement condemning their action and hinting at the possible annexation of more parts of Ukraine. Under the spotlight of foreign governments, greater sanctions were imposed upon the Putin regime, which put an end to any further mention of Novorossiya. But recent provocations, as the conflict enters its 8th year, could be reigniting Cold War tensions. So what is Vladimir Putin's endgame? Ukraine sits at a strategically important location, the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Black Sea. Its geographic position between Russia and the West also describes its political and economic footing. The two countries share a mostly common alphabet, a 2,200-kilometre land border, and a vital network of gas pipelines. But that's not all. They also have a tumultuous 1,000-year-long history as a prelude to the tensions that we're seeing today.
Ever since the end of World War II, Russia has defined its security as requiring buffer states between it and the West.
In 2013, then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych chose not to sign the European Union Association Agreement, which would have strengthened economic ties to the West. This was a move clearly seen to be pro-Russian. It sparked massive protests on the streets of Kyiv. By the beginning of 2014, the clashes with police turned deadly and ultimately led to the Ukrainian Revolution referred to as Euromaidan. Euro for the European deal that was scrapped, and Maidan for the Independence Square where the protests took place. Yanukovych fled to Russia and his presidency was dissolved by parliamentary vote. Russia took advantage of the chaos to send troops across the border into Crimea, claiming political legitimacy through the involvement of Yanukovych. Russian special forces seized government buildings and set up checkpoints separating the peninsula from the Ukrainian mainland. Under occupation by Russian forces, the Crimean parliament held an emergency session where a vote was held to dissolve the regional government, and a date set for a referendum offering a move to annexation by Russia. A month later, the referendum was held and swung overwhelmingly towards accepting Russian control. Despite a large and vocal Russian ethnic majority in Crimea, strong concerns remain over the legitimacy of the referendum being held under duress by Russian forces. President Obama claimed the results illegitimate.
Since the Russian intervention, we've been mobilizing the international community to condemn this violation of international law and to support the people and government of Ukraine.
While President Putin claims it fully consistent with international law and the UN Charter. A month later, pro-Russian militias seized the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk and declared them independent from Ukraine. The Ukrainian army moved to take the cities back, but Russian forces covertly backed the separatist groups, which led to fierce fighting across the Donbas region. In July 2014, the passenger airliner MH17 was shot down while flying over eastern Ukraine. All 283 passengers and 15 crew were killed, including 38 Australian citizens. While Russia has denied any involvement in the attack, forensic evidence points to Russian weaponry operating in an area under separatist control.
There is not any proof there. All the facts presented there mean nothing.
Ultimately, 4 men were charged, 3 Russians and 1 Ukrainian, who since gained Russian citizenship. None have been extradited to face charges. The incident led to further international condemnation, and in 2015, the Minsk II agreement was struck to end hostilities, returning the cities to Ukrainian control, granting the regions more autonomy with free and fair elections. But the agreement didn't last. The cities haven't changed hands, and there are almost daily violations of the ceasefire along the contact line. As many as 1.5 million people have been displaced by the conflict, and there are estimates of 15,000 lives lost. An uneasy alliance of militias, some with nationalist and far-right agendas, fight alongside the Ukrainian army on the Eastern Front. So far, the US has poured more than $2.5 billion in security assistance to the country since 2014. Under the Trump government, US funding was tied to investigations of his political rivals, undermining many years of US advocacy for systemic reform in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics continue to claim control over the area. They've morphed from militias into political parties who ran largely unchallenged elections in 2018. They're backed by Russia, who've deployed a combination of disinformation tactics, covert fighters as well as regular Russian troops and conventional military support to uphold the separatists in the Donbass region.
He's been conducting this not quite covert war in Ukraine since April of 2014 in order to change the country's national security policy. He's failed with that. That's why he's now threatening a major invasion.
Russia's involvement has drawn economic sanctions from the West.
We can see that sanctions are having effect on Putin's, mindset as well. And sanctions have more of sustained action, so it sustains Putin from not going or preserves him from not, going further in his plans.
For decades, most of the gas pumped out of the northern Siberian oil fields went to Europe through a network of pipelines spanning Ukraine. The billions of dollars in annual transit fees have propped up the Ukrainian government through these revolutions and conflicts. At great cost, Russia has attempted to circumvent Ukraine by building the massive Nord Stream 2 pipeline that takes Russian gas directly to Germany via the Baltic seabed. But economic sanctions threatened by the G7 could put this investment in peril.
The fact is that gas is not currently flowing through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. If Vladimir Putin wants to see gas flow through that pipeline, he may not want to take the risk of invading Ukraine.
Putin feels impunity. He wants Ukraine to keep in his sphere of influence. However, I would say it is unlikely that Russia will actually invade because it will face grave consequences.
At the same time, the Ukrainian government's move towards aligning with NATO has further strained the relationship with Russia. Putin announced red lines if Ukraine is allowed to become a member state.
A future Russian aggression against Ukraine will be met with a strong response and will have serious political and economic consequences for Russia.
So NATO calls Ukraine a partner, but not a member, right? So we need to understand that NATO is not legally binded to protect Ukraine if something happens from the Russian side.
Under President Biden, the US support for Ukraine has been strengthened, as has the calling out of Russian involvement to destabilize the region.
I've made it absolutely clear to President Putin, it's the last thing I'll say, that if he moves on Ukraine, the economic consequences for his economy are going to be devastating. Devastating.
Despite assurances from Moscow, satellite imagery showed Russian forces gathering at sites near the border. They appear to show a build-up of up to 100,000 troops, as well as tanks, artillery, and even short-range ballistic missiles, all within striking distance of Ukraine's border.
And I think Putin has a more long-term objective, which is actually to continue to destabilize the situation in Ukraine, to have a simmering or a frozen conflict in eastern Ukraine, to prevent Ukraine from ever joining NATO or the European Union. I think that's his long-term objective.
An actual invasion is extremely dangerous for Putin. But he's hoping that he will intimidate, again, the West, Ukraine, into making the concessions, at least some concession that he could point to as a victory.
And while the tactic was successful in drawing the US back to the table for bilateral talks, it's a dangerous gambit on a scale not seen since the height of the Cold War.